Did you know? Dragons of Tarkir, released on March 27, 2015, was Magic's 67th expansion, and took place in an alternate Tarkir, one ruled not by clans, but by dragons. This would be the third set under the game's final 3-set block model, and as such, R&D knew they had to deliver and bow out on top with the game's final third act. What better way than to maximize the number of dragons in any set in Magic's history? The trope is as old as high fantasy itself, and going all in on a casual fan favorite provided quite a few risks and challenges to Magic developers. But from the dust emerged one of the most beloved sets in Magic's recent era. Let's dive in now and explore all the high-flying action of Dragons of Tarkir. First and foremost, this set would emphasize change. The game is no stranger to visiting old planes, like Ravnica, Innistrad, and Mirrodin, but returning to a different Tarkir so quickly would challenge R&D to reinvent the world without the usually afforded luxury of time. As we've discussed in prior episodes, Sarkhan Vol's mission to reawaken Ugin the Spirit Dragon shifted the landscape of Tarkir. No longer would Khans rule this world. In their place arose 5 Elder Dragons who took command of clans, cultivating beneath their wings societies who worship their majesties. Here marks the first sign of change. All 5 Dragon Lords appeared in Fate Reforged, but were quite costly and did not affect tournament play. With the exception of Silumgar the Drifting Death, who destroyed token strategies and nullified Elspeth's +1 ability, these dragons appealed mostly to casual players. They also were printed at rare, which slightly restricted their potential power level. However, with Dragons of Tarkir, these flyers would realize their final form. Their typeline and names would reflect this upgrade. Each of the leaders would now be called Dragon Lords, and much to all EDH players' enjoyment, be labeled as Elder Dragons themselves. These iterations also saw heavy tournament play. Both Dragon Lord Ojutai and Dragon Lord Silumgar acted as win conditions in the format's popular Esper Dragons list, and Dragon Lord Atarka did heavy lifting in red-green ramp decks. Each of these Dragon Lords also had unique spin-down D20s that accompanied pre-release boxes, which became chase pieces for collectors and added a new edge to Magic's dice game. Because of this promotion, the Khans, in turn, would be greatly demoted, as seen best on Zurgo Bellstriker. Falling from warlord status to cowardly peon, poor old Zurgo's only job became warning the followers of Kolaghan of looming danger. His first ability emphasizes his cowardice, and despite being a 2/2 for 1 red mana, he was outclassed in mono red decks by Monastery Swiftspear during the season standard. On the flip side, Narset, the former Khan of the Jeskai Way, transcended her warlord form and ignited her spark. Appearing on a 4-mana Planeswalker card, Narset generated tons of hype during preview season. Her massive loyalty was an experiment by R&D to create a more durable walker, and her ultimate seemed backbreaking if reached in control mirrors. Narset also filled the void for a white-blue Planeswalker left by the death of Venser the Sojourner in the story. Despite these qualities, however, Narset flopped heavily in constructed play, and only recently has she rebounded in deck lists and Eternal formats. Change was also emphasized mechanically in Dragons of Tarkir. Khans of Tarkir would introduce 5 mechanics specific to each of the 5 clans and leave room for a 6th, Morph, which all cards could share equally. With the time-shifted world came an upgrading of some of those mechanics. Formidable, for example, went from the Temur clan caring about one beefy creature to Atarka caring about the strength of your team collectively. Exploit, as showcased on Sidisi Undead Vizier, allowed you to sacrifice a creature for a bonus, which would fuel future Sultai Delve cards. Perhaps the most straightforward mechanical shift between the sets was Megamorph, a variant of Morph that placed a +1/+1 counter on your creature when it was flipped face up. R&D went through a few iterations of Morph before settling on Megamorph. Aura Morph allowed you to flip face-down cards and attach them to other creatures as auras, which would serve as great combat tricks. Smorph, which was Mark Rosewater's favorite version, stood for Supermorph and placed a +1/+1 counter on your face-down creature. This, however, gave away free information to your opponent, so the middle ground became Megamorph. Unfortunately for Wizards, this keyword was not received well by players. Many thought it was an uninspired mechanic and joked about its name, claiming it sounded silly and too much like a Power Rangers reference. Regardless of its unpopularity, it did give us one of the set's best cards in the form of Den Protector. Nicknamed Maternal Witness, a play on words in reference to Eternal Witness inspired by the subject's baby in her sling, Den Protector was played heavily for the entirety of its life in Standard. Stapling regrowth onto an evasive creature helped mid-range strategies carve out advantage into the late game. The card has since become a cube favorite. Another standout green card from Dragons of Tarkir was Collected Company. At first underrated by players, Coco became a powerhouse staple of the format. With its ability to summon 2 creatures out of thin air, many decks abused the card to great advantage, calling upon cards with Enter the Battlefield effects for an extra bonus. Tireless Tracker, Spell Queller, and Reflector Mage, prior to its banning, were prime targets. Printed alongside the Dragon Lords and on theme for their ally-colored pairings were the cycle of new commands. All 5 of these cards have seen solid play across all formats and have proven their value over time. Jamoka's command did great work in the banned Heroic Shell and was particularly strong against Courser of Krufix decks. Atarka's command had an entire archetype named after it, Atarka Red, and helped burn players get in those final points of damage. And Kolagon's command is now a modern staple for its ability to regrow cheap, efficient creatures like Snapcaster Mage, and destroying opposing spell skites and Arcbound Ravagers. Like most modal spells, these narrow yet flexible commands linked flavor with function, and have established themselves as many players' favorite cards. Dragons on Tarkir are not hatched. They are born as adults from Tempests, which created design challenges for Wizards of the Coast. Since full-form dragons occupy a very narrow band of design space, usually around 4 to 6 mana, and having the flying keyword, there was not much wiggle room for pushing tons of dragons into one set. To solve this issue, R&D made references to dragons on many other cards in order to bump up the number of times the word appeared across the set. Silumgar's Scorn is such a card. It acts as both a force spike and a counterspell depending on a player controlling or revealing a dragon at the time of its casting. Foul Tongue Invocation also gives a bonus to players who play with dragons in their deck. These 2 spells were highly effective in Shota Yasuoka's list at the Pro Tour, who carried Ojutai and Silumgar all the way to 2nd place before succumbing to a very fast red deck. Cards like these, along with the Monuments, the Dragon Lords, the Cycle of Uncommon Dragons, the bigger, costlier rare dragons, and the commands, made for a set chock full of references to the big flying beasts. Since Dragon's Maze failed to deliver on the dragons, the Magic team made sure to load up on them in Dragons of Tarkir. And years later, when looking back, you can see their effort was successful. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this episode, please watch more Did You Know Magic right here on Gathering Magic, including 2 episodes on the 2 former sets in the Cons of Tarkir block. And if you're interested in my work, please check me out at The Magic Man Sam on YouTube. Cheers!